I just hope everyone just has a little bit more understanding overall, and just be kind to one another. I remember a lot of people are of different creeds, races, and identifications have just a hard time every day with like that constant stress of just trying not to get attacked. And even in this climate, with everything with all these kind of hate crimes against Chinese and Asian people, it's not like I walk the streets thinking that I'm going to be immune to it.
Today on Dirty Linen, we are chatting to Victor Liong. He is chef and owner of Lee Ho Fook in Melbourne and Chuuka in Sydney. He's one of the country's most interesting chefs, and I always love chatting to him about food and the hospitality industry. I have to say, I also love eating his food. Before we start talking about representation and racism, continuing with this fortnight of heavy but important discussions, I wanted to touch on something, Victor, that we were chatting about the other day. I just chatted to you for an article about pandemic silver linings, and I was really taken with the fact, not I guess that you play golf exactly, but that you've rebuilt a business that allows you to have a life that can indeed include golf. Can you talk to me about where things are at for you with the business at the moment?
Yeah, so we reopened November last year, and I lost a significant percentage of staff through what's happened last year, and kind of revisiting how we operate moving forward. We changed the offering at Lee Ho Fook to be tasting menu only. So we offer an 8-course tasting menu at dinner time and a 4-course at lunchtime. And I guess due to where we were in the CBD, we decided to only start opening at a capacity of 4 days a week to see how this kind of panned out. And as restrictions eased, we didn't open extra services. I still feel like we're trying to restabilize to optimal performance, but I think with these changes and the limited kind of opening hours, we've managed to kind of find a really nice balance between cooking in an intense and creative manner that we really enjoy, but also to kind of communicate our creativity and culinary kind of idea forward with the tasting menu. But also, funny enough, we managed to kind of keep the work-life balance in check. And I think with that, it kind of solidifies, it paints a little picture of, how to proceed moving forward. And I'm just excited to carry on this, and hopefully this is a model for something that's a little bit more sustainable in the future. And as in terms of business, something that we can kind of keep operating as, without being tempted to open or be almost too greedy to revert back to how things were, I guess. So yeah, that's how it's been for now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they say never waste a crisis. And I think it's really admirable, that people have managed to find ways to reopen and rebuild, but to not just go back to how things were. We know that hospitality was a difficult industry for the people that work in it for, a number of reasons, difficult on the body, difficult, difficult mentally, tricky to get people spending the money that they need to spend to make it all worthwhile. So I think it's really great that it's enabled you to reset in this way.
Yeah, I'm excited to kind of see how it progresses, because, I think everyone who's been in the industry for a while as a chef, operator, front of house person, has always kind of tried to figure what's a nice work-life balance, or, is there a model or a way to have, a little bit of both, so that you're not giving up, either your passion for working in a certain way, or the team that you like. It's, what I mean? And also, leaving time for yourself, family, and other things, because I think, as working in hospitality attracts a lot of really passionate people, really kind of almost obsessive people. And I feel that if you're not working in that environment, you feel like you're shortchanging yourself and your, like your kind of personal drive. And I think that's probably one of the unhealthy things. So it's nice to see there's a possibility of change now that this has all happened. So yeah, hopefully we can keep it up.
Yeah, it's really quite revolutionary. So I reckon probably as you were coming up in your career and training, I don't reckon that people would have spoken to you heaps about work-life balance. But tell us a little bit about, how you came up in kitchens and your career. I know you trained mostly, or you worked a lot in European fine dining. And I'd just love you to talk a bit about that and just sort of explain to us where Chinese food or Asian food fits in with that, or whether or not it did.
Yeah, look, I think, I was really drawn to working in kitchens for a number of reasons. I really like the idea of working in, a type team environment. I like working with my hands. I obviously really enjoyed eating and drinking. And, my first foray into kitchens, I was still in university. I was working in Sydney at the casino at the time, just casually, as they had a position called a general hand, which is kind of like a kitchen hand, but you didn't do any kind of dishwashing. It was just more vegetable prep and jumping into service when they needed you. And that, during that time I was a casual, so I worked in all outlets. So it gave me a chance to kind of figure out which style of kitchen I wanted to kind of be in, in terms of the range of, in a range of kind of settings. And then when I finished university, I decided I'd take up an apprenticeship, and I really enjoyed working in like a French kitchen. So I took a job at a bistro for a short time because it closed, called the Curtain. And I really enjoyed that because that was, I guess when I first started, it was kind of the tail end of the big kitchen brigade. I remember it was like 14 chefs in this kitchen and we only cooked for like 80 people. So, this day and age, that'd be unheard of. And I learned a lot because it was very classic. You know what I mean? Like it was that kind of Parisian and not that kind of neo-Parisian type, bistro. So it was like steak tartare, steak au poivre, like fish of the day, there was all vegetable garnishes, sauces. It was pretty cool, like made tartatins, soufflés, that type of vibe. And then when that closed, I went and joined the kitchen team at Galileo, which was at the Observatory Hotel at the time. And that was like a really cool kind of boutique hotel in kind of where Barangaroo is, up the top of the hill. And that at that time, the executive chef was Haru Inukai, who worked at Robuchon for years in Tokyo. And I really wanted to kind of map out a career where I could, potentially travel overseas or, and I thought, Robuchon was like my favorite chef and I'm still a huge fan of his kind of work. And I thought, this is probably, I'll dip my toe in the water and see how this is. And I remember joining that team and it was all Japanese chefs. So and a big kitchen too. It was, I think the brigade was 16 chefs and I was the apprentice, and learning with that kind of team was really fascinating, and a lot of these guys spent time in France. We're talking kind of the late 90s, mid 2000 type Japanese chef that traveled the world and staged at like, Alain Chappelle, the Twago brothers, Bocuse. So it was a whole team of young Japanese guys that worked French fine dining exclusively, stage at 3-star restaurants. So it was a nice kind of time to learn. Like it was intense and the hours were long and the pressure was pretty manic, but I really enjoyed that because you could see the skills develop, day by day, and the trust and the camaraderie, and after that I kind of diddled around for a little bit and ended up at the kitchen at Mark, and worked for Mark Best for about 3.5 years. So yeah, I think my early career, my headspace was all about just like fine dining and working for like a Robuchon-esque type, aspiration for my career. And, I kind of ended up at Mark, and I was kind of lucky how I got that position. And yeah, and working in that environment was, I think Bestie was probably always the pioneer of, the small kitchen, this and kind of intense focus, lots of creativity, so going from a kitchen where there was 14 to 16 chefs on every service to a kitchen team that was, 5 or 6 maximum every day, was a different change, because then you had to learn, you had to be pretty proficient at a lot of things, because you were doing the work of, up to 3 people each. And Mark and his reputation was on the line, and he was pretty demanding as a chef owner, and he expected a lot because he gave a lot. So I really enjoyed my time there, and I remember that was my focus for a long time, to try and hone in on a Eurocentric idea of what fine dining was. And looking back, I really enjoyed it. It's served me in a lot of kind of different ways, I guess, to graduate me into a chef owner at such a young age, I guess.
It's my mind is just crackling with all the things that you came upon and that you learnt and that you had to do. It just sounds like a really rich training ground. And to be part of those brigades, it must have been, as you say, very intense, but there must have been so much opportunity to learn. Anyone who wants to know more about Mark and about Mark Best, I really do recommend that you head to my brother podcast, Deep in the Weeds, and listen to Mark Best's chat with Anthony Huck. It's a really brilliant conversation, and he's certainly, just like an absolute key figure in Australian cuisine, or such an interesting mind around food and the dining experience. Victor, I sort of hate asking these sort of very flattening questions about heritage. I really, so there's my caveat. But tell us a bit about your Chinese Australian background, your Asian background, and whether you felt that you were putting that to one side at all in any way as you trained in this European style of dining.
Yeah, I think, my family migrated here from Malaysia in 1991. My grandparents are from China. So, growing up, eating Chinese food and being part of like a Chinese household was, that was my kind of heritage. I think, as a new migrant moving into a country like Australia, where I guess it's a collective group of people, make the society that we live in. When you're young, you're not sure about where you fit in this. So, I guess I've always kind of struggled with that identity, personally, I guess. And for a long time, you kind of squash I squashed the Chinese side down, and then just kind of embraced and did that, try to assimilate into society in, your mannerisms, in your kind of behavior, in your kind of thinking. And then obviously you back it up with your actions at work and with career. So I think in my mind, it was always going to be Eurocentric at the start. And a big part of it, me moving into the direction of Lee Ho Fook was kind of to re-explore the cultural heritage that I kind of squashed down for so long. But working in these fine dining restaurants, you just have to do the work, and the work is, it's like a very monolithic one chef, one idea, like umbrellaed version of creativity. So a lot of it was kind of like frog in the well type thing, where you knew there was a bigger world out there, but you just had to focus on, a certain style, flavor profile, technique, or aesthetic for the restaurants or for the chefs. So there's been a lot, and understandably, because it's like, you don't go to one style of artistry and work under a master and then try and give your own little flair. That's not how it works, right?
Well, I mean, no, I guess that's not how it works in those very, I guess, hierarchical kitchens, or kitchens where you're definitely there in the service of expressing someone else's culinary identity. But I mean, what was it that made you want to express something else?
Well, I think in my instance, I was in my mid-20s. I hit a point where I was like, look, I could either go overseas and go down the career path of, carry on chasing 3 Michelin stars and then eventually end up as someone's, executive chef, as an activation chef or whatever. Or I could stay in Australia and carry on the path and, work towards a head chef at like a gastro temple. Or I could take the kind of path with the steepest learning curve and dip my toe in the water and try Asian cookery. And I think I was lucky because at the time, Dan Hong was recruiting chefs to open Mr. Wong. So I knew Dan from just around, we used to go to El Loco a lot, and he just opened that. So I bumped into him one day and we had a conversation, and it was, and I thought, what, this could be a pretty cool opportunity just to see how that side of the culinary world works. And I learned a lot from, working with him and seeing how he kind of, his style of cuisine worked. And I really, I've got a world of gratitude for Dan. So, I guess that was the moment where I kind of, made the switch, I guess.
Interesting. And I mean, how did it feel?
Well, I think at the start, before I actually started working there, I thought, might be a super steep learning curve. But then, when I started working for Dan, I was at Miss G's. And entering that kitchen, because that was like a small, tight kitchen, I think there was only like 7 chefs in there, and it was very busy. And, I remember meeting the team, and I just remember meeting all these young chefs with very similar kind of stories. They were all of Asian heritage, cooked in some kind of, the majority of them cooked in some kind of, European slash, French fine dining background. And they all, kind of had the same turning point of thinking about exploring their own kind of culture and cuisine. And I guess the timing was fantastic for them as well, because, it was, the whole team was, young, super energetic, super knowledgeable, really, really good experience with a range of cuisines. And everyone just sat there going, like, facing Jowett and Dan, like, what do we do next, And it was really good.
And what about now? Like, you've got your own restaurants, you create your own dishes and menus. How do you meld or interweave the different influences and cuisines that you've got in you?
Well, I think it's kind of like, I'm still, perpetually learning and exploring the cuisines and history of China. And I think as I get older, it's more like, how am I going to weave that into like an Australian or a Melbourne lens? You know what I mean? So then it kind of, it's an idea that I kind of dabbled with earlier, where it's like, I didn't want to be identified as having a Chinese restaurant in Melbourne. I really wanted to be closer to like having a Melbourne restaurant that served Chinese food, and whatever that kind of idea meant. And, and I think that gives you, it gives me anyway, a sense of like, where I belong in kind of the fabric and culture of the city that I'm in. So, and that way the secondary part will be my, cultural heritage or the flavor profiles that I'm trying to push forward. But first and foremost would be like, how do I serve the community, the city, the region I'm in a little bit better, before myself, I guess.
And what about the European influences? Like, all the things that you learnt, those tarte tans and the steak au poivre, like all those kinds of techniques that you were so excited about when you were a young chef.
Yeah, I guess, we still weave them into parts of, components of dishes. And, the kitchen is very kind of, European setup, I guess. But I feel like I don't know how to set a kitchen up in a more efficient way, I guess. Yeah, but the rest of it's, like it comes out in cooking food when I feel like it. But I think in a work setting, it's a little bit more, I think we've defined a bit of a style of how we kind of cook and create at the moment. So that seems to be working for us. I'd like to think it's working for us a bit better after running the restaurant for 8 years.
Well, it seems like a pretty well-oiled machine, got to say. But so remember that event we did a couple of years ago, Melbourne Food and Wine Festival event at Flower Drum? And
yes,
it was you and Dan and Jowett and doing some of your dishes interspersed with, the just like incredible, like I bow down, Flower Drum. It was such a fun event. Like, what's it like for you to go? I mean, obviously Flower Drum is also a very Melbourne restaurant, but it is, the kitchen, like it's more, I guess, classically Chinese than what you do.
Yeah, 100%.
What's it like for you to dip into that world?
Oh, it's amazing. Like I really value and appreciate the relationship that, Flower Drum as a restaurant and the Louis family have, with my business and myself. And, it's really nice to go into, such a generous and, amazing gastro temple. These guys have been around 40 plus years. And for their team to, embrace us and for us to, create and cook together. It was a very nice experience. And, like looking at it, because I don't think, me, Dan or Jowett ever trained or kind of, we've always been visitors to Chinese kitchens and we've never trained in them. So it was still, I don't like to say the word novel, but it was, it's always still a new experience and it's, an interesting experience too, to see how they would set up a very traditional Cantonese Chinese kitchen, compared to how we would do it. So, it was an honor and a privilege, to work and to be in those situations.
Yeah, I walked into the kitchen. I couldn't even believe that it was happening. It just felt like such an entree into an incredibly, I felt so incredibly privileged to be there. But I mean, even as we talk about that, it just makes me so annoyed at how flattening and blanding out it is to talk about something like anti-Asian racism or anti-Chinese racism. Like it just turns these very diverse, multiplicitous, just like incredibly rich, different cultures and traditions and histories into this one thing. I mean, racism is always just so dumb, but to even have to frame a discussion as anti-Asian racism just is, I don't know, it just is so, it's just so annoying. And yet we have seen through this pandemic this surge in anti-Asian racism where people blamed Chinese people and more broadly people of Asian heritage for the pandemic. Chinatowns emptied out around the country. It was pretty awful. How did this strike you?
Yeah, look, it is very sad. And, it's still pretty sad and quite depressing to see, this still perpetuating, around the world, and how annoyingly it's taken quite a dangerous and real form in, parts of America and, but economically you can see it, happening and unfolding in, Australia and around the world. I guess it's... Yeah, I wish I had a bit of an explanation of why that is. But, like almost looking at those two cases side by side, it's like, is it because it's like a colonial-esque type history behind that? Is that I don't know. Is it like a history of indentured workers? Is that what it is? Like, yeah, I don't know. It's frustrating that it's still happening. And yeah, I'd be ignorant to say that it's not happening like every day in parts of, the country or the world. So yeah, it is, like you said, it is ugly and frustrating and just, yeah, a bit of a shame, really.
I mean, I think there's this idea of Asians in Australia being, and in other Western countries being this model minority, that it's, like succeeding on all manner of indicators, perhaps not being shouty and standing up. I mean, how does that, what do you think, does that resonate with you as a concept, and what does it mean if you act as this quote unquote model minority?
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, like, before I was a teenager, my parents used to say that, you'd have to, every time you were out in public and, in the kind of eyes of society, you'd have to behave in a way where they couldn't criticize you, for your actions. So it meant that if they had anything to say, it was all purely visual and it was coming from, their prejudice, so that concept of the model minority, don't make a mess, don't be ashamed, don't disgrace like the sum of us, that was, really kind of ingrained into our psyche growing up. You know what I mean? So it was because that, especially like when I was in primary school, it was kind of the time when Pauline Hanson came into the public eye, and, everyone was kind of, it kind of just peeled away this ugly layer and revealed this ugly layer of, racism and prejudice against, Asian people. And then I feel that like my parents' kind of protection against that was for everyone to kind of just be that model citizen. It's like, you can't, be upset with us when we're not doing anything wrong. But I feel that, it's when there's, any kind of form of racism or discrimination happening to you, it's not really about what you do. It's just how you look in the mirror, I guess. So, I guess that's always kind of been, drummed into us. It's the nail that stands out gets the hammer, so don't stand out. It's
just so awful, really, to think about this idea that you had to act in such a way that no one could complain about how you were acting, so that if there was any I guess negativity or aggression or microaggression, whatever it was towards you, that it was really clear that it was because of how you looked, i.e. Asian, i.e. it's racist. Like, that's a lot for you to take on as a young person walking out your front door into the world.
Yeah, it's and it's the more I think about that, it's, I think it's funny how in the East they say that, if you're a nail that stands out, you get the hammer. But in the West, it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's like, one gets attention, the other one gets bashed. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And I guess, I guess it's like the mindset of that, right? Because if you can go through the whole day without anything happening to you, I guess that's considered a safe, environment, and you're forced to kind of behave in a certain way. And it's funny when you mention the term microaggression. I guess it's, when you're on the kind of receiving end of, a possible kind of racist any kind of racist gesture or behavior, the microaggression falls on the victim. You know what I mean? So it's like, any kind of, off comment or kind of hateful gesture, you just kind of, you suck it up and you squash it down. You know what I mean? And that over a long period of time, kind of it sits in a quite a dark space, right? So Yeah, I guess I'm lucky that I can work in an environment where I can express myself creatively and kind of tell the story of what I want to kind of achieve in my work and my creativity, on my own terms. But I feel that there's a lot of people out there, people of color, that or what is considered as a nonconformist, in terms of gender, gender classification, or indigenous people, all of these kind of subcultures of people that experience this day to day, and and how many of them don't have an avenue of like therapy or an outlet of their kind of anger, or you know what I mean, like, and what does that mean? So does that mean that you have a quite a significant percentage of the population actually just quite angry?
Yeah, well, it makes me wonder about that as well. And you said earlier that you struggled a bit with your identity and you, I guess, tried to fit in. And I mean, cooking is the kind of arena where you can start off down one road and then you can sort of bring all that knowledge that you've gained, all the tartatan and the steak, the pepper sauce or whatever it is, you can bring that along with you as part of your suite of skills and experience into something where you are able to express, another part of your identity. It can be part of the journey, but I guess there would be lots of arenas in life where it's harder to, I guess, more for, take a little bit of another turn and still hang on to those skills and experience. People often talk about racism and microaggressions, particularly, well, not maybe particularly, but as well, as just such a total time waster and just such an energy suck. And it's so unfair that, people who experience it have to divert energy that could be put into all kinds of things that are fulfilling for them and great for the world into this sort of defensiveness and protection.
Yeah, I feel like, and that's exactly what it is, right? It's you're in a almost constant state of fear and heightened anxiety, and then that's just like your day to day. But then there's also that cost of like, how much do you squash down? How much do you kind of repress? How much do you not reveal so that you can be seen as, like less of a target, in your day to day? And that's, I guess that's a struggle for anyone who's experienced this kind of stress and trauma. It's ongoing, and also you never feel you're completely safe from it, because it's at an interesting point where I saw like I think Dave Chappelle put this forward. It's like the real kind of racism that is kind of the scariest is the one that you don't see. It's not the guy that tells you, go home, fuck off, we're full. It's the times where you get, kind of overlooked for the promotion, or you don't get included in, something that would be beneficial for you, if, long term. And they're all things that, like, to be in a society where that is like a weird simmering kind of undertone. I guess it's like the issue is a little bit bigger than just, everyone should just get along, or, why can't we understand each other? I think there's something underlying there, and it's got to come from something, and it's part of, I guess, a weird kind of like colonial history, a Eurocentric media, it's a sum of all these little things that kind of creates this environment that everyone needs to kind of navigate through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does, and it sort of makes me think about leadership and representation. I mean, you mentioned Pauline Hanson, a politician who, I guess, traded in xenophobia and creating these others within our culture. And, we've certainly had other leaders and figures in the media and, all kinds of people who have also played into people's worst sentiments rather than their best. So I think strong, ethical, thoughtful leadership is certainly something that can start to unpick these things. But I guess it's also an acceptance that the kind of systemic racism that you're talking about even exists. And I think we saw a lot of the push and pull with that with the Collingwood Football Club thing, where there was a report into systemic racism, and it was so difficult for people who'd been leading that organisation, some of them, to even admit that it existed. And until there is that recognition that it's real, it's going to be really hard to unpick it.
Yeah, and I think, it's layered through everything, right? And the conversation about diversity in anything is not just, I guess, for the fact that it just looks good on paper to have different voices and perspective. It's just so that it's got like a bit of a self-policing type kind of mechanism in there, because it's I read an article that was like, if you get 95% of the CEOs in the world, they're all going to be between like 5'8" and 6'4" and all white guys. You know what I mean? So basically, as a CEO, you can like just look at someone and go, this guy would, he would, a majority of people would believe that he would be able to, and it is a he as well, to lead, a corporation. So it's like, I think society needs to slowly shift away from, what we, I guess, I don't know, it's like a weird kind of stereotype or happy to accept type mentality, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. There's some crazy stat or factoid, like there are more CEOs in Australia called Andrew than there are women, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and there's a huge range of these, conversations where it's like, what's the argument for, having more women in the workforce? Does that mean that all of a sudden, just because they do that, they put the diversity card in the bin? What does a diversity card even mean? Like, I guess if everyone kind of does their little kind of clean out of their closet and have a look at how their own kind of perceptions of how things should run, like across the board, I think I'm sure it's going to be a painful exercise, even with everyone's own little kind of organization. I guess it's a step in the right direction, I guess,
Yeah. Well, is there something that you could point to that you'd like to see change? Like anything specific that you think you could point to that you're like, yeah, this particular thing should be changed? But
you know what? Like, I think it's slowly, I think, after the pandemic and with everyone being able to have their own voice and communication being easier, you can slowly see there is a movement towards some real changes through, for example, what happened recently with Bon Appetit, and that's almost like a pillar for like the food industry, because I can honestly really only comment for the industry that I work in and operate in, really. And having that change and then seeing that slowly trickle down to to other kind of real household names, from food publication, and the opinions and the articles that that are being kind of written lately. I think Yvonne Lam does a very good job, writing, really kind of tough topics for that. And I don't know how she does it, but she articulates it so well. And, just seeing stuff like that.
She's great. She was on this. She was on the podcast earlier in the week. So anyone who hasn't listened to the episode with Yvonne,
listen to it. It's amazing.
She's so great. So anyone who hasn't listened to it, go back and have a listen. She's fantastic, and we've put lots of links in those show notes as well. But sorry, Victor, for interrupting.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, I totally highly recommend exploring her work, because she articulates it in such a very nuanced and balanced viewpoint. And and she's one of many. I think Lee Ho is doing a fantastic job. I think she writes for Ida in the States, but there's little pockets of it, and I wouldn't even think that this kind of content would be out 5 years ago, 8 years ago. It's so it's good to see that change, and hopefully it resonates with another small pocket of people that feel or think the same way, and it slowly gives them an opportunity to say that their voice and their opinions can be expressed in a certain way, either through work or words. It's a pretty heavy overall topic to kind of try and unpick.
Yeah, it's society. It's big.
Yeah, I know. It really is. You know what I mean? It's like, it really is.
But I guess it's like, well, you just start where you are and you just do it, I guess. There's a bit of reckoning involved, and then you just, a lot of reckoning, what needs to think about it, what needs to change, and then just, start where you are. Is there anything else that you want to say, Victor?
No, I think it's I just hope everyone just has a little bit more understanding overall, and just be kind to one another. I remember and a lot of people are of different creeds, races, and identifications have just a hard time every day with that constant stress of just trying not to get attacked, and even in this climate, with everything with all these kind of hate crimes against Chinese and Asian people, it's not like I walk the streets thinking that I'm going to be immune to it, right? There's that quasi little bit of fear going, could be just an angry person out there who just doesn't like me, and I just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Makes me so upset, and to think that you would feel that, and if that anyone would feel that, and no matter who they are, and it's just it isn't as simple as being kind and just telling people to be kind and people remembering to be kind, but that is a bloody good start, and a really good place to stop in the middle, and a really good place to finish. I think a heap more kindness and perspective, and taking of deep breaths, and just getting your shit together would be really good, and leadership. I just feel like we're crying out for strong leadership. Yeah, I think we're all craving for a kind of visionary and reformist leader that has a little bit of a long-term view and a more kind of unifying message than another leader that's worrying about their next kind of tenure or their re-election date. I think that'd be nice.
I think it's that big. We need the small picture, which is like people just going around being super kind to each other all the time, and then we need the big picture, which is like people presenting us with a huge vision, and just making it possible for everybody to buy into it. Sounds a bit utopian, but I mean, geez, if you're not looking for utopia, what are we all doing?
Yeah, true. I think it's like, it's either love or war, right?
Yeah. Victor, it's been really, really great to have this big chat with you. I really appreciate your time and you putting the energy into this discussion. Thanks for all the great food that I've eaten and that I know I will eat coming out of your pans and woks. Just thank you for bringing your perspective to this difficult conversation.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you, Dani. Thanks for all your help and support through all of the hard times that we've had over the last kind of year and a half. You've been a bloody saint, and it's my pleasure to be on this podcast. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thanks for embarrassing me. See ya.
Bye.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This